people don't know what I look like until now. Until they start going to the movies. They're gonna see my face. Big deal.
Yo, what's good? OmgHawk, OneManGang, back at y'all with another one.
Realize it's all real. Pitch black on my real niggas. Underground past the pavement. We be wild.
You know, I hope everyone is well as always. Congratulations, we made it to 2023. I hope everyone enjoyed their respective holiday season. If you made it here for the first time, I appreciate you stopping by. If you end up liking the video, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and I'll keep them coming. And to my returning viewers, you already know how I feel about you. I wanted to get this work to y'all earlier, but I ain't gonna hold you. This holiday season been for real, but we back. Sorry for the wait. I appreciate all the new subs, all the comments. They mean a lot. Thank you. And to the returning viewers and my day ones,
love my squad. We up in this thing. Love what this shit do. Love my squad.
and you already know, the details in today's video are disturbing and viewer discretion is advised. Alright, let's get right to it. Today's episode is the second installment in a series dedicated to my home state.
Peace, Connecticut. I'm on my CT shit, but when ain't I?
You know where the fuck we from, the connect got cut.
Bitch, show me love every time I'm in the club. Ain't no party like a party in a cut.
It's Delaware, Connecticut, Connecticut, Connecticut.
Volume 2 takes us to our state's capital, the city of Hartford, Connecticut. Hartford, aka the heartbeat, the beat, or the insurance capital of the world, is seated in the county named after itself and is located pretty close to the center of the state. Hartford is the fourth largest city in Connecticut with a decent population of a little more than 120,000 people. Hartford is bordered by the Connecticut River to the east, providing beautiful views of its cityscape over the water. Now, although the Hartford skyline isn't as prominent as New Haven's or Stamford's, I personally think Hartford's is impressive, especially at night. And One Financial Plaza, or the Gold Building, looks fire sometimes with the rising or setting sun. Hartford is definitely another underdog city when it comes to getting recognition for its contributions to pop culture and our culture. Hartford was the birthplace of this guy. And most real hip-hop fans know about Fuego Bass by now. But besides them, there hasn't been too much mainstream action coming out the city. Salute to those that have been consistently working for a decade plus though. Oscar Black, Guns De Niro. I think Banger Bandanas was the first CT rapper I ever found on YouTube. And salute to Hartford Poe too. His old shit aged well and it still goes. And Broken Blenders.
And we don't fuck with new faces, it ain't nobody around. They even sniffing up that Whitney or that Bobby Brown. My man stuck some whole milk and probably calm him down. I'm still waiting on my moment like it's probably now.
Yeah, he got it right now. Salute the new generation coming out of Hartford dropping some fire as well. Now, Hartford has a long and interesting socio-economic history, which I will break down more in depth in future Hartford episodes. Today's episode is focused specifically on the North End district of Hartford. The North End is divided into a few smaller neighborhoods, including Clay Arsenal, Upper Albany, and Blue Hills, with the majority of the people being of African American or West Indian descent. The North End is home to many West Indian restaurants known for their amazing food. Back in the day, I used to go to Keeney Park to get trees, and I would promise you it was an experience every time. The old heads would be sitting at little tables playing games and burning incense outside, which I always thought was kind of funny, but often you get to see somebody go run up an bush and grab whatever for you. It was good times though. Now, back in the 1940s, West Indians started immigrating to Hartford for work in Connecticut's tobacco fields and had established a prominent West Indian community in the north end of the city that remains to this day one of the largest West Indian communities in the United States. In 1950, a handful of these North End residents started an organization in a basement that would later become the West Indian Social Club. in efforts to retain a strong sense of their island heritage and culture while establishing a base for support for their brethren as they adjusted to North American life. In 1962, the club held its first annual West Indian Independence Celebration, a festival to celebrate the independence won by various nations in the Caribbean from the European countries that ruled over them prior. The festivities include Caribbean music performances, cuisine, and a parade donned with dancers and floats representing each island's culture through the streets of Hartford. The celebration is the oldest of its kind in the country and celebrated its 60th year this past summer. Now, Hartford unfortunately has rightfully gained a reputation as one of New England's murder capitals, with some residents adopting the nickname Homicide Hartford, as the city has been plagued by a gun violence epidemic for the last 30-plus years. A victim of the crack era just as much as any major metropolis in America during the 80s, Hartford has been dealing with the violence associated with the drugs ever since, sometimes even surpassing the per capita murder rates of larger, more infamous cities such as New York and Philly. On August 9th, 2008, the city of Hartford was celebrating its 46th annual West Indian Independence Celebration. With a great turnout as usual, the parade rocked out from its start near Battle Street in the city's Clay Arsenal neighborhood, continued all the way up Main Street, and was reaching its end that evening. Traditionally, the end of the parade was celebrated with a huge concert and block party centered around the landmark West Indian Social Club on the 3300 block of Main Street. At around 6:30 p.m., as the party was really just getting started and thousands of people flooded the street, two groups of young men walking the parade route near the intersection of Main Street and Cleveland Avenue got into a brief argument before one of the men said someone from the opposite side was ducking behind the others and clutching a firearm. He turned to someone on his side, grabbed their firearm, and tried to shoot the man he saw holding, but for whatever reason, the gun didn't fire. At this point, both sides produced weapons and got to shooting it out, sending bullets flying everywhere and people desperately running in all directions, falling over each other, and stepping on one another in efforts to reach safety. It was reported that one of the shooters was running away from the gunfight with his arm extended behind him while simultaneously discharging his weapon blindly into a crowd of people. Parade goers were shielding their kids and crawling under cars and trucks to avoid the bullets. One witness told the Hartford Courant, after the initial volley of shots, it was as if anyone with a gun just started using it. When the smoke finally cleared, the reality of what actually happened started to set in as the screams of terror and cries of agony were heard from all sides of the block. There were victims at Star Hardware, more victims at the intersection of Main Street and Cleveland Avenue, and even more victims at Main and Montville. A 15-year-old boy was shot in his ankle. A 16-year-old boy was shot in his left butt cheek. Another 16-year-old boy was shot in his calf. And a 17-year-old girl was shot in her leg as well. Now, thankfully, these were all described as non-life-threatening injuries. Sadly, a 17-month-old baby girl named Sanaya was shot in the leg while she sat in her stroller. She was stabilized and expected to make a full recovery. As the first sounds of gunshots rang out, many thought they were firecrackers considering the day's festivities, until noticing 7-year-old Tyreek Marquez had collapsed to the pavement and was bleeding severely from a head wound. Miraculously, the tough little man survived the headshot. He was rushed to Children's Medical Center and was in ICU for some time, where his mother stayed bedside until she knew he was going to make it. Unfortunately, the shooting left Tyreek with partial paralysis and a long uphill battle towards recovery. And tragically, 21-year-old Ezekiel Roberts, affectionately known as Zeke, was shot in the torso and succumbed to his injuries. Now, although gun violence was nothing new to the Heartbeat, this summer's Eve shootout really shook the city, making national headlines and placing a big spotlight on Hartford's North End. Years later, we would learn the individuals involved were no strangers to extreme violence, as this crew of individuals were allegedly responsible for multiple shootings and murders in the years before and after the parade shooting. In today's episode, we're going to be covering the infamous parade shooting, as well as a few more of the many incidents of violence attributed to one of these crews that turned up the North End forever stamping their name into Hartford street history and the long-lasting impact these crimes had on the city. Please note, the version of events in today's case is compiled from a combination of court documents, testimony from those involved, and witness statements given to Connecticut news outlets. It's fair to keep in mind that the state's version of events are just allegations and may not be the exact accounts of such events, regardless of the resolution of the accused person's case. With that being said, let's get right to it. Money Green Bedroc was actually a hybrid crew that came together sometime around the early to mid-2000s when two North End neighborhood crews, Money Green from the Green Street area and Bedrock from the Bedford Street area, formed an alliance amidst beef with another faction from the North End that went by the Ave in reference to Albany Avenue. Now, both Bedford and Green Street were both wild blocks on their own, well deserving of each of their reputations. Now again, before we continue, I do want to reiterate that all these accounts are allegations, even if said individual has been convicted. Although convictions typically mean the state has proved their case beyond a reasonable doubt in the eyes of the jury and the court, unfortunately, oftentimes innocent people are convicted and incarcerated unjustly. Now, some of the accounts of the events in today's case are going to make a couple people seem like pure demons. But to be objective, we must consider the fact that a lot of the information in the state's version of events came from a source that many wouldn't deem credible, considering the information came from an individual that was an active participant in most of the crimes in question. In fact, he might actually fit the criteria to be considered a legit serial killer. Now, keeping that in mind, let's continue. In early June of 2007, the alleged leader of Money Green Bedroc, Donald Amin Rayner, affectionately known as Amen, and another member, Jose Rivera, affectionately known as Chamo, were grabbing a bite at a restaurant when they spotted Delano Gray, a reported member of the Ave. They left the restaurant and started driving away when Chamo noticed Delano had taken a picture of their car before they pulled off. He told Amen, who allegedly responded by saying that Delano had to go. A little over a week later, on June 18, 2008, Amen called Chamo and told him he wanted to test out a Kel-Tec .223 caliber assault rifle he just acquired about a month earlier, and he wanted to see if they can catch anyone from the Ave. Amen picked Chamo up and the two pulled up to the back of his building on Bedford Street. Chamo had a car parked back there that they would use to stash weapons and work. Amen allegedly put on some latex gloves, popped the trunk, and grabbed a Kel-Tec. He loaded it with a large magazine before hopping in the backseat of the white Acura they pulled up in. Chamo got in the driver's seat and drove around the North End with Amen crouched down in the back, checking spots where the Ave and their affiliates were known to frequent. Chamo drove down Enfield Street when he happened to spot Delano standing on the sidewalk talking to a woman. Amen had him spin the block as he positioned himself in the back seat. Now, Delano was actually about to hug his girlfriend, who he had recently been having problems with and was mid-makeup, as Chamo pulled up on him for the second time. This time, Chamo let off the gas and the car slowly rolled up as Amen popped up, hung out the window with the rifle, and started dumping at Delano. Delano and his girlfriend both tried to run, but he only managed a few steps before he was struck by gunfire and fell to the street. Reports say Amen continued to fire at least 10 to 15 more rounds at Delano as he laid on the ground before Chamo peeled off. Delano's girl reported that she leaned in to hug him when Delano suddenly jumped back and she saw the man with the rifle pointed at them before they both dove for cover. Once the shooting stopped, she ran to check on Delano, who was lying face down on the sidewalk. She told him, "It's over, get up," but Delano didn't respond. She rolled him over to tragically discover he was shot multiple times and was bleeding profusely. She told police she saw a white sedan speed off toward Capon Street, and a friend helped her move Delano's body to the back of the house in fear that the shooter would spin the block a third time. She took a gun from Delano's pants and placed it in a nearby garbage bin before police and paramedics would respond, but tragically, Delano wouldn't survive his injuries. No immediate arrests were made, and the case would eventually go cold. Delano's murder was one of a handful that would be the start of an extremely violent summer for the city of Hartford in 2007. Many North End neighborhood crews had established themselves, were getting to the bag, making the blocks look fly, and putting in pain along the way. Money Green Bedroc had their blocks from Mather to Walnut. The Ave was heavy from a large section of Albany Avenue up to Capon Street. There was also West Hell in the area, real heavy on Westland Street, as well as other North End crews with a longer history such as Netland Court Projects that still controlled their sections. On February 16, 2008, around 2:30 a.m., a man and woman returning to their home on Baltimore Street after a night out reported as they parked and exited their vehicle, the woman noticed two men in the street walking towards them. As they walked up, one of the men raised a handgun and started shooting at them, while the other man raised a rifle and started letting off as well. The couple took cover and managed to avoid getting hit by the shots. Hartford PD recovered 22 shell casings from the scene. Later on that morning, in a possibly not so strange coincidence, as the woman's sons were sitting at the computer looking at pictures from a show they attended the night before, the woman noticed the two men that had shot at her were in the photos and had attended the same show as her sons. She later identified the men as Amen and Zeke. She attempted to contact the detective on the case, but she never got a response, and no immediate arrests were made for this shooting. By spring heading into the summer of 2008, Hartford streets were off the hook as various alliances between different neighborhood crews had the entire North and South ends virtually war zones. On June 26, 2008, Hot 937 brought Keisha Cole and Akon to the city for the station's 7th annual Hot Jam concert at the XL Center right in downtown Hartford. Now, the concert was a success and brought the whole city out, including crews from all over. Reports indicate at some point, members from Money Green Bedroc got into an altercation with some individuals from Sands Bridge, another Hartford neighborhood project crew, over what witnesses all agree was something petty. The two crews banged out at the show in a wild brawl before the fight was stopped and both crews left. Now, as the Sands Bridge group was walking north on Main Street near where the new baseball stadium stands today, Money Green Bedroc members went to their cars parked nearby, retrieved weapons, and started shouting at the Sands crew as they were walking up Main. 20-year-old Kenny Sullivan, affectionately known as Banger, stepped into the street and yelled something back at them. According to witness statements, James Dexter Brown, affectionately known as Decky, allegedly opened fire, hitting Banger in the stomach. Banger's people loaded him into a car and drove off on Main Street, turned onto Pleasant Street, stopped the car, and for reasons unknown pushed Banger out onto the street and took off. He was soon discovered and transported to Hartford Hospital, where he unfortunately succumbed to his injuries some hours later. Now, at the time, no witnesses came forward, and Banger's murder would eventually become another Hartford cold case. Now, the streets were already hectic for Money Green Bedroc. Alongside their issues with Sands Bridge, their beef with the Ave was only turning up approaching the 4th of July. At this point, all holidays and large gatherings in the city were already risky, and with various active beefs all over the North End, some blocks with common enemies had formed even more alliances. Money Green Bedroc had formed an alliance with West Hell as they beefed with the Ave that year. On July 4th, 2008, Anthony Alexander, affectionately known as Chunky or Chunk, was celebrating his 21st birthday along with the 4th of July festivities. Chunk was suspected of being affiliated with the Ave. Allegedly, Zeke spotted Chunk as he sat in his car with a friend on Edgewood Street at around 10 p.m. Zeke allegedly fired several rounds, hitting both Chunk and his friend multiple times. Chunk's friend was transported to St. Francis Hospital and treated for non-life-threatening injuries. Chunk was transported to St. Francis as well, but tragically he wouldn't survive and lost his life on his birthday. About a half hour later, there was another shooting on the 200 block of Albany Avenue. An assailant in a dark-colored sedan fired multiple rounds into a Nissan Maxima. The severely wounded driver of the Maxima drove away but jumped the sidewalk and crashed into a fence. It was later reported that the driver was in fact Decky, who was shot multiple times and survived his injuries. The shooting unfortunately left him blind in one eye and paralyzed from the waist down. Decky's shotgun passenger, 15-year-old Jakeem Tully, suffered only minor injuries. Reports would later indicate Decky's shooting was in retaliation for Chunk's murder. Tragically, only 16 days later, on July 20th, 2008, 15-year-old Jakeem Tully was standing in front of a store on Albany Avenue with a group of people when a car sped by letting off shots, hitting Jakeem in his arm and his chest. He fell to the ground where a crowd gathered around before a passing car noticed Jakeem and rushed him to St. Francis. Unfortunately, he didn't survive this shooting. It's reported that Jakeem's murder was an accident as the rounds were allegedly intended for someone else from Bedrock. The shootings and murders turned up the temperature of an already scorching summer, with those involved on all sides angry and wanting revenge, and the city in its entirety overwhelmed with the pain of so much loss in a short period of time, added to the fear of not knowing who would be next or what terrible news you'd wake up to. Hartford PD was attempting to make some efforts to stop the gun violence plaguing the city. Hartford police were tipped off about a spot in the woods behind the garage on Eastford Street where Money Green Bedroc had stashed weapons and ammunition. On June 16, 2008, police searched the spot and recovered multiple guns, including the Kel-Tec assault rifle allegedly belonging to Amen. Bedrock was convinced that someone from West Hell gave police the information about the stash. Now, although there could be other reasons we'll never know, what we can determine is that the two crews quickly went from allies to enemies seemingly overnight, sparking another potentially deadly beef for Money Green Bedroc that summer. In the next couple of weeks, various shootings would occur between West Hell and Money Green Bedroc, culminating in the brazen August 9th shootout at the West Indian Day Parade. We later learned that Zeke, Chamo, Dwight Shakespeare, Chad Adger, affectionately known as Cheeks, and other Money Green Bedroc affiliates were walking along the parade route when they came across 17-year-old Michael Ledbetter, affectionately known as Mikey, with a group from West Hell. Mikey argued with Zeke briefly before the shootout ensued. People on both sides let off, but it was determined that the bullet that ended Zeke's life was most likely friendly fire from a 9mm Chamo let off at least 15 times in the melee. It was never determined whose round struck 7-year-old Tyreek in the back of his head. Now, Tyreek is a true inspiration, and I'll speak more on that later. Chamo, Amen, who was Zeke's cousin, and another Money Green Bedroc associate, Willie Wilson, affectionately known as Boo, allegedly did go out for get back that night. They ended up shooting at a group of people in West Hell territory on Harper Street. No West Hell members were hit, but a girl suffered a non-life-threatening wound to her arm. Allegedly, Chamo's piece malfunctioned and wouldn't shoot, while Amen let his off at some people sitting in a car. They only learned they hit the wrong person when Shorty actually called Chamo later on that night and accused him of shooting her. The following day, August 10th, 2008, Chamo, Amen, Boo, and another individual allegedly cruised the north end in two separate vehicles looking to catch West Hell members and avenge Zeke's death. Amen and Boo spotted two West Hell members pulling up to the Burger and Pizza Land restaurant on Barber Street, and they pulled their vehicle up behind their targets. One of the West Hell guys got out the car and entered the restaurant. Moments later, the other guy went to exit the car when Amen allegedly opened fire multiple times, hitting his target. The man that had went inside the restaurant had just walked back out the door when Boo allegedly opened fire on him, chasing him back inside the pizza spot and hitting his target before both men fled the scene. Fortunately, the two shooting victims would survive their injuries, and again, no immediate arrests were made in this shooting. Now, within the next month or so, Mikey, Sylvester Burrell, and Cheeks were all picked up by Hartford police and arrested for the parade shooting. Now, it was assumed at this time that Mikey had fired the round that killed Zeke. These arrests would calm the public outrage, but didn't do much as far as quelling gun violence in the city. 2009 would be another violent year for Hartford. Amidst the beef, Money Green Bedroc managed to hold down all their North End real estate. One spot Bedrock had on their block, the store Jakeem was murdered in front of, was a 24-hour deli affectionately known as the 2-4, located at 485 Albany Avenue on the corner of Bedford Street. At the time, it was the only 24-hour store in the area, which brought people from all over to the Bedrock block at odd hours. A-Man's older brother, James Rayner, affectionately known as Ape, was allegedly holding it down for Bedrock that summer, which I'd imagine was a non-stop job, as every day many other dealers would attempt to catch sales on their block, considering the amount of traffic that the store brought through. On July 24, 2009, a man named Luis Torres went to his plug on Liberty Street and purchased some heroin. Now, Luis usually only copped a bundle or two, between 10 and 20 bags, but this night Luis actually copped a stack or 100 bags of dope. He told his plug he intended to post up by the 24-hour store and try to sell it. Now, his plug told him that's not a good idea, and that was a bad area, but that didn't deter ambitious Luis. Luis actually left and went back to New Britain, picked up his girlfriend's father before driving back to Hartford and pulling up at the 2-4 around 2 a.m. When they got there, they struck up a conversation with two women outside the store. Luis and his girl's pops thought the two women were prostitutes, but the women weren't on that type of time. At least not for that night, as they were just enjoying a night of pager activities in the apartments upstairs from the 2-4. Luis asked the women if they knew where to get any powder, in reference to cocaine, to which the women did and agreed to hook him up. Luis and his girl's pops drove the women to a spot on Irving Street where they got some coke and drove back to the 2-4. When they arrived, Luis pulled out a bag of heroin and asked one of the women if she knew where he could catch some sales. She told him she didn't use dope and couldn't help him, and that she was going back upstairs. Luis asked if he could accompany her, and she told him that he should stay downstairs because people don't know you. Ambitious Luis wasn't having it and told her he was going to go upstairs with her anyway, to which she replied, "Then you're on your own." The group went upstairs to an apartment that had about 6 or 7 people playing cards, getting high, drinking, and hanging out. Shortly after arriving, the two women and Luis's girl's pops indulged in some crack smoke, while Luis, who had been drinking that night and was wasted at this point, started offering bags of dope to people in the apartment. Now, just as the woman tried to tell him, nobody wanted anything to do with him since they had never seen him before. Soon after, a group of 3 men entered the apartment. The woman later identified Bedrock's Altaurus Spivey, affectionately known as S, along with Joseph Ward, affectionately known as Neutron, and a third man she didn't identify, but described as being a bigger black guy. S immediately pressed Luis, asking, "What are you doing here?" Which everyone in the room understood pretty clearly as you shouldn't be trying to hustle here. The 3 men left the apartment, and soon after, Luis left out the back door with an unidentified female, while Luis's girl's pops and the 2 women stayed upstairs with the party. As Luis was downstairs behind the 2-4, he was ambushed by a group that allegedly included S, Neutron, Ape, and another Money Green Bedroc member, John Dickerson, affectionately known as Jerk. Neutron allegedly beat Luis with a baseball bat, while others punched him and stomped him out. Jerk allegedly pulled out a firearm and let off 1 round into Luis's back before everyone fled the scene. Luis screamed out to someone on the block that he thought he was about to die and to call an ambulance. That someone went inside the 2-4 and called 911 for Luis. Hartford PD responded at 2:25 a.m. and found Luis with a busted up face and a bullet wound to the back. He was transported to the hospital where he survived, but unfortunately the bullet lodged in his spine, leaving him paralyzed. No immediate arrests were made for this shooting. Later on that same day, there was another shooting on Liberty Street a block over, but unfortunately this one would be fatal. Allegedly, Ape and another Money Green Bedroc affiliate, Kendall Jules, affectionately known as Jock, formulated a plan to shoot 23-year-old Kenneth Carter. Now, Kenneth was allegedly selling weed, and although he wasn't from the block, he was suspected of meeting people there to catch sales, which was in violation. Ape and Jerk were posted on separate streets as lookouts when Ape allegedly called Kenneth and lured him to the block. After Kenneth parked up near Williams and Liberty, Jock ran up and fired multiple rounds into his chest. Kenneth threw the car in reverse in an attempt to reach safety, but ended up hitting multiple parked cars. Paramedics arrived and transported him to St. Francis, where he tragically succumbed to his injuries. Again, no immediate arrests were made, and both of these shootings were added to the growing pile of Hartford's cold cases. Now, one common thread in the majority of these shootings is the lack of arrests made at the time. This was possibly due to inadequate investigations by detectives, a lack of cooperation from the victims and the community, or a fair combination of both. I mean, it was 04-05 when the Stop Snitching DVD flooded the streets, and everywhere you went, someone was rocking the extra long Stop Snitching t-shirt. But in Hartford, the phrase was more than just an urban fashion trend. The chances of being targeted for cooperating with the police were very high. The following months turned to years with seemingly no progress in the investigations and without justice for the victims' families. In 2010, West Hell member Mikey took a plea deal for first-degree manslaughter for Zeke's death at the parade shooting and was sentenced to 14 years in prison. Sylvester Burrell took a plea with 4 years in prison, and Cheeks took a plea that came with 3.5 years in prison. At the time, it was still presumed Mikey had fired the round that killed Zeke. It wouldn't be until a few years later when a new source of information would open up the floodgates for warrants and arrests on Money Green Bedroc. What would come as a complete shock to many, the informant was Bedrock's own Chamo. On July 1st, 2011, Chamo went to the area of 226 Martin Street with two other people when he saw an individual he had a beef with. He masked up and grabbed another .223 caliber assault rifle he had acquired and locked in on his target. He claims as he went to shoot, his target saw him and pushed Angel Gomez in front of the bullets. Angel was unfortunately hit and passed away from his injuries. Hartford police received information regarding Chamo's involvement, and on August 25th, police were tipped off about his whereabouts and took him into custody. At the time of his arrest, police recovered an assault rifle in the back seat. Chamo candidly confessed to the detectives that this was the weapon he used to shoot Angel, but that Angel wasn't his intended target. On October 28, 2011, Chamo was sentenced to 42 years in prison for Angel's murder. Now, at some point, Chamo decided to help investigators from the Hartford's Cold Case Unit and Hartford Shooting Task Force start clearing their backlog of unsolved cases. It's reported that his inspiration to come forward came from Hartford's Cold Case Playing Card Project. Starting in 2010, playing cards featuring pictures of victims of Connecticut's unsolved homicides, missing persons, and unidentified remains were distributed to inmates in Connecticut's prisons in efforts to generate new leads on cold cases. Delano Gray's homicide was featured on the 8 of Clubs in the series' second edition. The state's attorney applied for and was granted a grand jury investigation into the violent crimes associated with Money Green Bedroc. Grand jury investigations are 1 or 3 judge panels that review testimony and evidence gathered by investigators and determine whether or not there's enough probable cause to determine that a crime had been committed. The grand jury presents their finding to the court, and if they rule that the probable cause has been found, an indictment follows charging the accused. These investigations are only granted if the prosecutor can show some proof that standard investigative procedures had been exhausted or were too dangerous. Now, the power that the grand jury has, opposed to a standard investigation where police gather evidence, apply for a warrant, get it signed by a judge leading to arrest and prosecution, a grand jury investigation can subpoena witnesses that would otherwise be non-cooperative, making them provide testimony under oath in front of the judge or panel of judges. Once testimony is provided voluntarily or not, it's neither cross-examined or challenged by the accused. It's completely at the discretion of the judge or judges if the testimony and evidence gathered by investigators is credible enough to determine probable cause. Now, by the end of 2011, Chamo had provided a statement implicating himself and Amen, as well as 12 others in various unsolved Hartford shootings and murders that Money Green Bedroc was allegedly responsible for, including the murder of Delano Gray and the Baltimore Street shooting, as well as fingering Zeke for Chunk's murder. An 18-month investigation would follow. It wouldn't be until November 5th, 2013, when Chamo was arrested for Delano's homicide, while he was already a couple years into his 42-year sentence. Besides this new case, he already had various felony charges pending that could have ultimately ensured he would die in prison. Chamo entered into a written cooperation agreement with the state, promising that if he confessed all his criminal activity and provided testimony as a witness for the state against his co-conspirators, sentencing for these crimes would run concurrent to his existing 42-year sentence, and also the state would agree to allow Chamo a chance to have his sentence reduced by the Superior Court. After this grand jury investigation and testimony from Chamo and many others, Amen was arrested just a few days before his birthday on June 14th, 2013. He was charged with Delano Gray's murder, 6 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, 7 counts of attempted murder, 4 counts of first-degree assault, along with 24 weapons violations. His bail was initially set at $18.75 million, and he was scheduled for arraignment on June 17, 2013. At his arraignment, prosecutors intended to show Amen was an extreme danger to the community as they outlined his alleged leadership role in Money Green Bedroc and the allegations of violence attributed to him. Amen's lawyer, John D. Goulash, argued that Amen wasn't a menace to society and had been making a living flipping houses. His lawyer requested that the bond be lowered as $18.75 million was unreasonable, but the judge instead increased his bond amount to a record-breaking $25 million.
Hey, yo, what the fuck?
Which might be the largest bail amount in Connecticut history. In fact, the only comparable bond I could find was a $20 million bail given to
old Ching Xuan Pan, who's accused of killing Yale graduate student Kevin,
who's currently awaiting trial for a February 2021 New Haven murder. Amen was remanded to state custody to await trial. Trial started on September 8th, 2014, and Amen was represented by star Connecticut defense attorney Norm Pattis. Chamo was the prosecution's star witness, and many others provided testimony during the weeks-long trial, but the state took a L on September 16, 2014, when the judge declared a mistrial after jurors couldn't reach a unanimous verdict after 2 days of deliberation.
A hung jury in the high-profile murder trial of a reputed Hartford gang leader. Word came down today a verdict could not be reached in the case of Donald Rayner.
The state wasted no time as a retrial was underway by March of 2015, but at this time he was only being charged with 1 count of murder for the shooting death of Delano Gray. Alongside Chamo's testimony, prosecutors called their ballistics expert, John Stephenson, who testified that the majority of shell casings found on Enfield Street, where Delano was murdered, as well as the majority of shell casings found after the Baltimore Street shooting, positively matched the .223 caliber Kel-Tec allegedly belonging to Amen. The jury also heard testimony from one of the victims of the Baltimore Street shooting, and the evidence presented by the state in this second trial was enough to sway the jury. Amen was found guilty for Delano's murder. Amen agreed to plead guilty to the transfer of firearms, and the other 40-something charges were dismissed. Amen was sentenced to a total of 60 years in prison. This would be a short-lived win for the state, and we'll get to that soon.
Yep, I'm gonna need you.
The grand jury investigation would also result in Ape's January 14 arrest for Lewis's shooting. His trial started in fall of 2014. Jurors heard testimony from Lewis's plug that sold him the stack, the girl who got him the powder and warned him not to go upstairs, a couple guys that were 2-4 regulars and witnessed the events transpire, a female that happened to be outside and was familiar with the crew as she purchased drugs and would test the quality of drugs for Ape and others, as well as testimony from other area dealers and users establishing Money Green Bedroc as a drug trafficking organization. Ape was ultimately convicted and sentenced to 37 years for first-degree assault and conspiracy to commit first-degree assault. Him and Jock were later charged in 2015 with Kenneth's murder, to which Ape pled guilty to second-degree assault for his involvement. In April 2015, a day after the judge gave his brother 60, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison that would run concurrent with the 37. Jock was arrested in Staten Island and ended up pleading guilty to first-degree manslaughter with a firearm and was sentenced to 18 years in prison. S was sentenced to 3 years for Lewis's beating and shooting, while Jerk was sentenced to 4 years, and Neutron received 18 months. Boo took a plea for his involvement in the Burger and Pizza Land shooting and was sentenced to 7 years in prison. The grand jury investigation also led to Decky's arrest in December 2018 for Banga's murder after Hot Jam. Decky had been serving a federal prison sentence in North Carolina for an unrelated drug conspiracy case. Upon completion of that sentence, he was picked up on this case. His bail was set at $1 million and he was remanded to custody to await trial. In February 2021, Decky reportedly rejected a plea deal for a reduced charge that came with an 18-year prison sentence. This case is still unresolved and Decky is presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. The grand jury investigation actually helped Mikey's situation when in April of 2014, the West Hell member that was initially fingered for Zeke's shooting got his manslaughter conviction vacated in light of Rivera's testimony. He was immediately released after being resentenced to 4 years after already serving 6. In early 2016, Mikey was facing charges again for allegedly shooting at his uncle over a disagreement involving a weed sale, but Unc recanted his story and the charges were dropped. In November 2016, police responding to a domestic incident found Mikey in possession of 1 bullet. He pleaded guilty to being a felon in possession of ammunition and was sentenced to 15 months in prison, the minimum that federal guidelines would allow, followed by 3 years of supervision. He was released in April of 2018, but soon after started failing drug tests and ended up catching another domestic. On October 30th, 2019, he cut off his ankle monitor and went off the grid. On November 20th, 2019, U.S. Marshals found Mikey in a Hartford hotel room with about $5,000, 11 pounds of weed, and a little more than 4 ounces of cocaine. In July 2021, Mikey was sentenced to 27 months in prison for drug distribution with credit for time served. Tragically, just a few months ago, it was reported that on August 19th, 2022, 32-year-old Mikey was shot and killed at an apartment complex in Brattleboro, Vermont. The man who shot him, Nicholas Baker, claims Mikey tried to force his way into his apartment when a gun fell out of his pocket. Nicholas claims he picked Mikey's gun up and fired in self-defense before Mikey jumped out of a window and succumbed to his injuries. A search of Nicholas's house recovered 50 bags of fentanyl and coincidentally a box for the same model firearm that he claims fell out of Mikey's pocket. He was arrested for possession with intent to distribute for the fentanyl and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, as his prior criminal record includes a 2017 felony conviction for growing weed. At the time of the making of this video, Nicholas hasn't been charged with any crimes related to Mikey's shooting death. Cheeks beat a separate murder case in November of 2014 for a Garden Street shooting and home invasion in April of 2012. But he did plead guilty to charges stemming from an August 10th shooting, which could be the Burger and Pizza Land shooting, but I couldn't confirm that. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Now, it's arguable to say that this wasn't the first murder charge beaten by Cheeks. In November of 2006, a birthday party on Silver Lane in East Hartford ended in a huge brawl outside where 17-year-old Hiram Cologne Jr. was stabbed multiple times and tragically passed away less than an hour later. The fight was alleged to be gang-related, and 6 young men were quickly arrested for their involvement. Among them were Cheeks, Decky, and Zeke. Prosecutors initially alleged Zeke had landed the fatal stabs. Although it was reported over 100 people were outside, there was still a lack of witness corroboration, and all 6 defendants accepted plea deals, pleading guilty to lesser charges and receiving probation, but no jail time for Hiram's murder. In March of 2019, while Ape was about 4 years into his 37, he was blindsided with an arrest warrant for the May 10, 2002 murder of 25-year-old Harry Baez. The 17-year-old cold case caught some motion when a retired Hartford police sergeant that was working as an investigator for the state's attorney allegedly received an anonymous call asking him to revisit Harry's case and informing him about a potential eyewitness. Once questioned, the witness told investigators that Harry went down to a fight jumping off near the corner of Center and Sim Streets involving a large group of people. When Harry got the best of someone he was fighting, others jumped in to help Harry's opponent. The witness told investigators they themselves jumped in the fight and started to grab Harry out the mix, when Ape allegedly leaned in and fired a round into Harry's head. Police responded to the area a little before 9 p.m. and found Harry with wounds to his head and his shoulder. He was transported to St. Francis, where he was pronounced deceased. Ape was questioned at the time, as police received an anonymous tip just 30 minutes after responding, claiming Ape was responsible. He told police he was at work at the time of the shooting, and his alibi was later proven false, but for whatever reason, it wasn't pursued further at the time. The result of this case is still pending, and at this time, Ape is considered innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Now, Amen stood on his claims of innocence and had been working with attorney Andrew O'Shea in efforts to win an appeal. His appeals went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and in December of 2020, in a unanimous ruling by 6 judges, and another L handed to the state.
This L is working overtime, bruh.
Amen's murder conviction was overturned, and he was granted a new trial. The court ruled that the testimony from the state's ballistics expert John Stephenson could not have been admissible because the courts had established that the science he used to determine the casings positively matched the Kel-Tec didn't meet the court standard of evidentiary value. The court also determined that the introduction of evidence from the Baltimore Street shooting was prejudicial considering he hadn't been prosecuted for it and it occurred 8 months after Delano's murder. As of today, the state is preparing for a third trial as Amen sits in jail on a $1.5 million bond. Without definitive ballistics evidence, it looks like Chamo's testimony might be the only evidence implicating him in Delano's murder. I'm not sure if a conviction can be made solely on the testimony of a co-conspirator, but we'll have to see how it goes at trial. Amen is still presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. First and foremost, my utmost respect and condolences to the families and loved ones of all the young lives lost that I've discussed today. And much respect and best wishes to the survivors of the acts of violence I've discussed as well. Definitely want to give a special shout out to Tyreek. Tyreek was only 7 years old when fate and some poor decisions by others altered his and his family's lives forever. Tyreek's a fighter though, and just 5 years later it was reported that although he had struggled with partial paralysis on one side of his body, he was still the bright Tyreek everyone knew and loved. He would later go on to graduate from high school and become a youth advocate against gun violence, and has traveled the country with a group of Hartford youth to rally for policy reform for his peers and support other victims of gun violence as he shares his story with the country. He truly is an inspiration, and I wish him the absolute best moving forward. The impact that the August 9, 2008 West Indian Day Parade shooting had on the city of Hartford still resonates today. Approaching 15 years later, many that were in attendance still suffered the trauma from the carnage they witnessed that fateful evening, and sadly the vibe of the parade hasn't been the same ever since. In the immediate few years following the shooting, the festivities drew much smaller crowds as people were either afraid to attend or were turned off by the overwhelming police presence in the streets. The parade route was actually changed, no longer dancing through the historically West Indian-rooted North End neighborhoods to the iconic West Indian Social Club, instead partying from Main and Battles down Main Street to Bushnell Park, where the concert has been held ever since. Although the city has adapted to the changes and some even prefer the new route, it's unfortunate that the tragic events of 2008 uprooted a 40-plus year strong cultural city tradition. I honestly had something different in mind for Connetiquette Vol.2, but as a battle rap fan from Connecticut with a heavy interest in true crime, the Kid Slade scandal had half my algorithm locked up. As I watch the vlogs and I hear and see people discuss these cases and the people involved, I notice the overwhelming amount of insensitive and ignorant comments. Now I'm used to battle rap fans in comment sections with horrible takes, garbage opinions, and always wanting to debate like it's a one-off in the comment section. Just know that anyone with real life experience will read these threads and just think y'all are clowns. What y'all have done inadvertently is made Money Green Bedroc and their crimes go viral. And I get it, but please keep in mind that soon, battle rap will move on to the next scandal, and these men will still be fighting for their freedom. The murder victims' families will still be mourning them, and the survivors will still be dealing with their respective traumas. You know, if the allegations made against Money Green Bedroc in their entirety are true, these were some straight savages with no regard for human life at all, partially responsible for destroying the quality of life for the people of the North End throughout the 2000s. But one interesting aspect I heard from talking to people from Hartford is that most of the young men on all sides of this beef were friends as kids. Some were cousins, and some were even brothers turned ops. They all attended the same North End neighborhood schools, summer camps, and played sports together before years would pass and the guns came out. It really is sad how it played out for their generation, and my condolences to everyone that's missing their people. Although I couldn't confirm, I read somewhere Luis Torres passed away from an unrelated circumstance sometime after the incident. If this is true, my sincere condolences to his loved ones as well. You know, Ambitious Lewis was warned multiple times about attempting to catch sales on that block. Although it's tragic what happened to him, and in my personal opinion, an ass whooping probably would have sufficed, I can understand the frustration of having roots and family in a neighborhood that's constantly getting violated by outsiders. I understand Lewis saw it as an opportunity as the 2-4 was booming, but just picking a neighborhood you have no ties to because it's a money block is wild disrespectful, and I'd advise against it unless you're beans.
Nigga, you gonna get down or you gonna fucking lay down?
I'm joking, but in all seriousness, you gotta respect the history of these neighborhoods. People paid their dues and went through lifetimes of real pain on these blocks. Not wanting outsiders posting up selling their drugs is an understandable disposition. As of today, some of the individuals involved are home, and everyone that has been sentenced will be home at some point. Even Chamo, which is still unbelievable that he snitched to the degree he did, especially considering he was arguably the most active shooter out of everyone. I almost want to say he's a serial killer as 3 bodies is a qualification, but I'm not sure if he meets the exact specifications. It almost feels like Chamo is Hartford's Alpo. Amen has a petition on change.org, along with a way to donate with funds going towards his bail. If Chamo's testimony is the only evidence against him, he might actually have a good chance at trial. Now, regardless of whether or not he's responsible, in my opinion, I don't think it's fair that someone can just say they did something with you and that be enough for a conviction. But the burden is on the state at this point, regardless of how difficult that burden is. The more years that pass, the more of an uphill battle it usually is for the prosecution, so don't be surprised if Amen is home one day sooner than you think. I'd like to extend my best wishes to everyone involved moving forward, as well as the whole North End and the whole Hartford. I want to send a special rest in peace to 40 Cal of 40 Cal Productions, true Hartford YouTube pioneer, Salute to Jet Black, We Are the People on YouTube. He said some shit I agree with. We gotta start telling our own stories. I'm from New Britain, but I know Hartford has thousands of stories that would make great content and help archive your history. And I hope some creators from your city get inspired. I appreciate y'all letting me archive this one for Connetiquette Vol.2. Rest in peace to the 2-4. I will cover another Hartford case soon, but it won't be a gang case. But you might catch me at the ranch house fucking up a red hot egg and cheese. But anyway, if you're still here, I appreciate you for real. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you subbed already, thank you again. Just continue to be great. Everyone, please stay well and stay safe. Until next time, OneManGang.